Today's episode is sponsored by Stitchcraft. Stitchcraft is a fabulous and friendly quilt shop, both online and in downtown Boca Raton, Florida. Stitchcraft caters to modern and traditional quilters, sewists, and stitchers alike, with everything from fabric and notions to machines. Let Stitchcraft help you get all you may need for your machine and handwork projects. And you can save 15% by using the promo code NAPS2018 at checkout. Thank you so much, Stitchcraft. And now here's the show. Welcome to episode 112 of the While She Naps podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Today, we're talking about color and dye with my guest, Carol Soderlund. An artist and educator for 25 years, Carol's curiosity about the range of color derived from yellow, red, and blue dyes led to her creation of the color mixing system for dyers. Carol encourages the freedom of mixing color by eye with results-based samples to guide the students. A former high school teacher, Carol was nominated for Teacher of the Year in 2013 and again in 2015 by the International Association of Creative Arts Professionals. Carol is co-author of Playful Fabric Printing with Melanie Testa. She has shown her quilts in juried venues across the country, winning awards including Best of Show at the International Quilt Festival in Houston, Texas. Carol Soderlund, welcome.
Thank you, Abby. It's so good to be here.
It's so good to talk with you. And so you first began dyeing fabric a long time ago when I was still in, I want to say, junior high school.
Oh my gosh. It was a long time ago.
Yeah, 1988. And you couldn't find a particular gradation of fabrics sort of in the commercial, market for fabrics. And so you thought you would start to dye them. So what were you working on at that moment?
Well, I was working on a very large art quilt, and I had this kind of big idea in the middle of the night, and I drafted it up, and it looks like a big globe. You can see the quilt on my website still, and but I wanted to make it look kind of 3D, even though it was a flat quilt on the wall. I really wanted it to have perspective and to be, very dramatic. And so it would be shaped like a globe, although it would sort of be an abstraction of sort of a quilting pattern, but stretched over a globe. And then it would have rainbows of colors shooting out in different directions. And so I shopped and I shopped and I shopped for colors for the rainbows. And I wanted sort of gradations of light to dark to help me create the shape. And I was able to find quite a few commercial colors, but when it came to the grays, so I wanted the basic pattern to be grays to contrast with all those colors, grays to black. And I could find a greeny gray, or I could find a lavender gray, or purplish gray, or a bluish gray, but I could find grays that kind of really would go together from light to dark. And back then, of course, there was much less available than there is now commercially, but I was pretty frustrated because I had shopped and shopped and shopped, and I had little children around my knees, and I'd bring them with me and I'd give them an ice cream cone, but it really wasn't quite enough incentive. So I started leaving them home with my husband. I mean, I live in a remote area of upstate New York, and there weren't very many quilt shops at all. I had to go an hour away from my home to find any colors and any fabrics. And the online business didn't exist yet. Internet didn't exist yet, at least for shopping. And so it was either some mail order or drive. And so I drove and drove and drove in about a 4-hour radius of my house. And I finally found some colors, but I could not find the grays. So I said to my husband, I cannot make this quilt. I'm just so frustrated. He said, well, I think you should make this quilt. He had a stake, and he liked the design too. So he said, why don't you dye the fabric? And I was like, oh my gosh, I never thought of that. And so I was like, well, because I don't know how to dye. And So I just went off and I thought about his comment more and more. And then I recognized that in the American Quilter magazine that had come a month or two earlier, there was an article by Jan Myers Newberry. And that was the name of the person. I didn't know her, but she wrote an article about how to dye fabric in a gradation. And so I kind of took a look at that and thought, well, doesn't seem like rocket science. I think I could do this. I ordered some black dye. It came. I ordered fabric with it. 24 hours later, I had my gradation of grays that I needed. And it was like, wow, I did all of this driving around. If I had just dyed this fabric, I would have had it so easily, just what I wanted. And so I was pretty hooked on it. 24 hours and I get exactly what I need.
Yeah, right. And necessity, right? That's mother of invention. Exactly. So, you know, and I do have to wonder, like today, there's so much fabric on the market, whether in some ways it's sort of stifling creativity. That's another topic we could talk about, but
it's another topic, but it's, you know, it's amazing since I've spent the time then, you know, dyeing sucked me in. It was just so much fun. And that was the first dyeing I did. And then I made it in this quilt. And then that was the quilt that won Best of Show in Houston. So that was a little bit of a pat on the back for doing the dyeing and everything. It actually worked very well. And so I was kind of hooked with the dyeing stuff. But even today, even though there is so much wonderful fabric out there and a lot more solid colors lately have been coming on the market in the last few years. And at that time, I was using solids. I've gone through I love to do solids. I love to do prints. I love to do it all. But, you know, there's lots available, but there's so many colors in the world that still the color that you might need and that you might have in your head, it can be really hard to find. It's amazing that it isn't out there with all of the stuff we have available. But you know, this is what people who come to my classes tell me. There's like, just like you, I still can't find what I need. I still want to dye some of my own. I might use what I've bought, but I might also use what I make. And
Right. So, and I know you said that you were wanting to get 3-dimensional color, and I hadn't heard that word before. And I think of 3 dimensions and color together, I'm not really sure what to envision. So, can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, generally people think of color like maybe on a color wheel, and it's a circle of color, and you think about color around the edges of the circle or maybe going across the circle, but it's a flat circle that you're thinking about in your mind. And that is one model of color that works quite well. But there are other models of color that later on I started getting super interested in color and investigated all of this stuff. And over the last 100 or 150 years, different artists have created models of color that go beyond a flat surface and into a 3D surface. Like there's a model of color based on a sphere. There's also a model of color based on a cube. And this is one that really appeals to me as a quilter because cubes are built out of squares. And so if you can imagine a Rubik's Cube, and most everybody knows what that is because we've played with that toy of the puzzle of twisting colors and stuff. But if you just erase the colors that they put on it and just imagine your own colors, and it sort of goes from a light corner that would be white to a dark corner all the way opposite that would be dark. And then the colors kind of gradate across the surface of this cube. And so on one side, you'll see the yellows to the oranges, and on another side of the cube, you'll see the yellows to the greens. And on another side of the cube, you'll see the yellows to the purples. And, you know, so there'll be different aspects of the cube, and the different colors will be arrayed in a 3-dimensional way. And I actually teach dyeing using that as a model in one of my classes, the color mixing for dyer system that you mentioned in the intro. And so we dye up a model of the cube and create over 1,000 samples of color to put together in a 3-dimensional way. And you really see color a little bit differently when you do that. Because like take any color, whether it's peach or whether it's taupe or whether it's I don't know, brown or purple, you'll see the colors that might be the neighboring colors of that and how to transition from one color to another. So when you've thought about color in this way, not only are you able to dye those colors if you want to, but you can also just look at that and kind of be inspired for what color you might need to put next to something in your quilt.
Wow, that is really eye-opening. What a neat experience.
It's a cool experience, and people get very excited in that class when they start to see it come together and see this 3D shape and happening. And it's pretty exciting. And I'm still excited about it after all these years. And every time I start to dye these colors, I get excited all over again.
So, I mean, and you talked about this early success you had where this quilt that you struggled so much to get these colors ended up winning best of show. And there's nothing more motivating, right, than success for sure early on. But you hadn't been making art quilts for some time before then. And then you sign up for a class with legendary quilt maker Nancy Crow. And I read that the supply list for that class, and we're going to talk about sort of the massive numbers of things here, because you just mentioned 1,000 something samples, but the supply list for this Nancy Crow class was 100 yards of fabric. Is that right?
I know, it's hard to believe that there wasn't a typo or something, right?
Yeah, I'm like 100 yards. I mean, how would you even get that in a box?
Abby,
that's a lot.
To be really truthful, that's sort of minimum. Nancy has, she's gone on I took her class in about 10 years after I made that first quilt. I was doing lots of quilts in between, but finally got to the point where I thought I might take a class from her. And she was legendary even back then, and I think it was 1999 when I did take a class from her for the first time. And her supply list was legendary too. And you are correct, it was 100 yards of fabric that you bring to the class, and you're supposed to have every different color that you can, and all kinds of values from light to dark. And then you have to also, on top of that, bring a bunch of yards of white fabric and a lot of yards of black fabric too. And so, 100 yards is sort of the starting point, which boggles the mind.
Yeah.
And truly, when people go, either they drive with, bins and bins full of fabric, or they ship stuff ahead, or they bring heavy suitcases and, one pair of jeans and 5 T-shirts, but lots of fabric to class. And she, this is kind of just what she's always done. And it's really true. If you talk to people who have been in her class, they'll say, yeah, you have a lot of fabric there, but you still don't always have what you need. So, it's kind of funny. It's a big bar to jump over. So when you sign up for her class, you kind of have to really have the motivation to do that.
And you totally did, because you spent a year getting ready for this class, and then 3 weeks dyeing all the fabric right up to the point when it was time to go. And you came with, 3 times the amount she asked for.
Well, yeah, because, I was talking about the 3D model, and I had that idea to dye up that model for a couple of years. I'd been studying color, and I had the idea that, oh boy, I would understand this 3D stuff so much better if I could really see the fabric and put it in my hands and see the colors all together, not just imagine it, or try to paint it or something. And so I had the idea to dye up these fabrics, but I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be so much work. How can I do all this work? But then a couple of years later, I had the idea I should sign up for a Nancy Crow class. And I knew about all these colors and this supply list. And so I said to myself, well, maybe this is my time. Maybe if I dye up this model of all the colors, I can just dye up bigger pieces and I can bring them to class, and then I've got the supply list covered. So that's actually why it took me a year, because most of that year I was just sitting on the couch with like a notebook and calculator and trying to figure out how to make all these colors and how to figure out recipes so everything would gradate beautifully. And I did figure it out. And then the time I had left before the class started was 3 weeks. So that was kind of crazy. And so I did all my dyeing in 3 weeks, but it was 3 weeks of like 15-hour days and ironing into the night because, of course, I had this time schedule I was following. Okay, if I do this many yards a day and all of this, and then, but I forgot that not only do I have to dye it, but I also have to, wash it out and iron it. So I was working pretty hard those 3 weeks, and I showed up in class and I had 343 yards of colored fabric.
Wow.
Because that made one complete cube model. And that was the first cube model I ever dyed up. And I did dye it up in big pieces and take it to class. And so, and that, that was a bold thing to do kind of. But I was lucky because it sort of worked out pretty well, just what I was thinking of. And so other people took notice that I had done this and started asking me, could I show them how to do it? And I was like, oh my gosh, this was a lot. How could I show somebody else how to do it? So finally, actually, at the conference where I was taking this class from Nancy, there was another very, very famous dyer who was attending that conference, and that dyer was Ellen Noble. And Ellen had written a beautiful book, which you can still buy now. It's called Dyes and Paints, and it's a classic dyeing book. And Ellen came up and introduced herself to me, and she said, "I've heard about this fabric you dyed, and I'd love to see it." And I said, "Oh, well, here's the fabric." And I pointed it to all these bins behind me, or the fabric was all lined up in color order, She starts to say, "Oh, it's beautiful." And I said, yeah. But what you really want to see is this. And I pulled out this dye notebook where I put all my samples of the colors, which sort of is arranged in the 3D manner. If you add all the pages up, you kind of are creating this cube that I mentioned. And so she looked at the dye notebook and she was like, "Oh, my goodness, I've never seen a dye notebook like this."
Wow.
She said, "You teach dyeing?" And I'm like, yeah, I teach dyeing, but, I just did this for me. And she said, "Yeah, but could you teach this?"
Uh-huh.
And I took a great, big, deep breath because truly, when I did this for myself, I had no idea that I would ever teach anyone else how to do this because it was just a huge concept in my mind. And, I just had like scrawls in a notebook. I didn't have anything organized at that point. But I was a high school teacher and I had been teaching for many years. So I was an experienced teacher. And she said, "But could you teach this?" It was a little bit like waving a red flag in front of a bull. And, yes, because pretty much I can teach what I want to teach, right? And so I took a deep breath and I said, "Well, I could teach this, but it would have to be a 5-day class." And she just looked, "Oh, great, because I'm going to have you teach this at Pro Chemical and Dye." Oh my gosh. So I just that was like jumping in the deep end.
Right. So let's unpack this a little bit. So you had, I mean, this is a neat moment. And I think there's definitely some things to think through. People can think through for their own lives and their own passions. So, you had been a high school teacher, which we mentioned in the intro, and you also had been teaching dyeing already, but the types of dyeing you were teaching were much less involved. Is that right?
Well, yes, they were low water immersion and, lots of fun dye play techniques, which we all, and I still enjoy today. Color by accident type dyeing and, just having a lot of fun and dye play. And one-day classes. Okay.
Yeah. So you were teaching one-day classes and you were teaching like locally or regionally?
Regionally.
Okay. Yeah. Regionally. And so you went, but you spent all this time, working on this concept that was really complex, but also really sort of, I don't know, show-stopping, I guess. And eye-opening. There you go. Yeah. And sort of, but just did it out of pure passion, something that you were following your own really, your own curiosity that you felt just really compelled to sort of see this project through. And then this woman, And then you sort of brought it out into the public by coming to this conference with this renowned teacher where other people who really understood it would see it. And so, we were approached by this woman who was really well known and asked if you could teach this. And really you were thinking, I can't teach this, but you said yes and said, I can do it, but for a 5-day class, which was much longer and more involved than, something that you had been doing before.
Than I had ever done before. I mean, people typically, Nancy was teaching 5-day classes. Other people taught 5-day classes. I had not taught a class of that length before, other than high school, where, obviously I'm teaching students every day. But I just felt that, there was, more than enough material for 5 days. In fact, the real problem was how to pack all the material into 5 days.
I want to take a minute now to talk with our sponsor, Stitchcraft.
I'm Johanna Felberbaum. I am the owner of Stitchcraft in Boca Raton, Florida.
Okay, and what is Stitchcraft?
Stitchcraft is an independent sewing and quilting shop in sunny South Florida that caters to people who like to quilt, sew, stitch, and create at all levels and interests. We have classes in everything from beginning quilting to national teachers visiting. We do lots of home decor classes and, of course, bags, which is where I started. We carry fabrics for all tastes, from modern to traditional. But because of where we are, we do tend to bright and happy. We have a very large selection of tropical fabrics and a wonderfully curated collection of batiks. We also carry full lines of K-facet fabrics and lots of fun novelties and anything else that we think our customers will enjoy. We have a wonderful all year round community here in South Florida, but we get visitors from all over the world, from as far as Siberia, South America, Europe, just about everywhere. And it's so wonderful because whether or not they speak English, we all speak the same language of fabric. I am a lifelong crafter and got about it in a little bit of a backwards way. My first store, which was on the west coast of Florida, was a shop that I shopped in for 20 years. And when the owner wanted to retire, I didn't want to see it close, so I bought it. And I've worked in retail for a very long time and in various other areas of business and marketing. So my lifelong passion of crafting and my business background just kind of fell into place. We will do personal shopping via email and online, even by text, at real time across the globe.
That's great. Wow. So how should people find you and get in touch with you if they either want to sort of communicate online or even come in and visit if they're in the area?
Well, if you're in South Florida, we are in beautiful downtown Boca Raton, right on Federal Highway in a freestanding pink building, of course. But if you're not able to come to South Florida, stitchcraft.com is open 24/7.
Thank you so much, Stitchcraft. And now back to my conversation with Carol.
As soon as I came out with saying I could teach it in 5 days, that's how Ellen responded. She said, "You can teach this in 5 days?" And I'm like, oh boy, I'm in trouble now. But that was like the bold move. And so I had to live up to that. And so, in fact, I did get on the teaching schedule at Pro Chemical and Dye.
And we should say what that is. What is Pro Chemical and Dye, just for people who've never heard of it and don't know what that is?
It's a company that sells dyes to dyers, to home dyers, and they sell paints and all the things that you need for surface design and books, and they have a really good line of surface design products. They also have a classroom associated in their business, and it's a little section of they have an industrial building not very far from you, Abby. They're in Fall River, Massachusetts.
I know. I need to go visit. I think that would be so fun.
Yeah. And so they do hold classes there pretty much spring through fall or early summer through fall. And so I got on their schedule, but I made sure that I had like a year's worth of lead time because I knew I would really have to work on the presentation of this material. How could I present it to others so they could understand it and be able to do what I had done in a straightforward way? So I spent, I spent that full year really developing the class, developing handouts, working on my timing and refining what I had done just for myself so that I could present it to other people. And then I did present it for the first time at ProChem. We call it, it's sort of a nickname, we call it ProChem, at ProChem in 2002. That was the first time I taught it there.
Okay.
And then, shortly thereafter,
yep,
I taught it for Nancy Crow.
I see. And so, right. So then you went back to where, where you had started with this and became a teacher there.
That's right. And Nancy, Nancy saw the notebook that I had in the classroom that time, and she had kind of heard some of the buzz about all the fabric I had brought, that people were interested in that. And she's, Nancy is a dyer. She dyes her own cloth for her quilts as well, and has done for many, many years. So she uses no commercial fabric in her quilts. It's all hand-dyed fabric. And so she was interested in the fact that I was able to dye all of these different colors. And she heard I had a notebook. So at the very end of that class that I took from her, which was actually a 2-week-long class, she said to me, "Why don't you show me that notebook?" And so I did. And once she saw it, she said, "I heard you're going to be teaching this." And so she signed me up to teach at her new teaching facility, which we now know as the Timber Frame Barn in Ohio. And so she has a beautiful surface design facility on the basement level, although it's a walkout basement, it's daylight, but it's the lower level of the barn. And she has a nice dyeing facility there with lots of space and teaching room and so forth. And she hires people to come in and teach classes. And she teaches classes upstairs on the piecing and abstract quilt making, the way she does it upstairs.
I see. So was this, would you sort of say that this was kind of a pivotal moment in launching you into being a national, going from being a regional into
Absolutely.
being a national teacher?
Yes, it was absolutely kind of that pivotal moment, because as a regional teacher with 1-day classes, I was teaching techniques that quite a few people knew around the country, and other people were also teaching. But this new material, this big material, was my own material. It was my own idea, sprung directly from studying color theory and translating the theory that our artists have developed over the years into dyeing and making that transition between color as an abstract idea and concrete color that you can really make and use in the form of cloth.
Right.
And so I made that transition, and I did the work to make it work easily and in a fun way, because the class is really fun to do. People just enjoy it a lot. And so that, that was just a very unique way to dye, and kind of still is.
And do you feel like, I know that becoming a national teacher, or even being able to have opportunities to teach internationally, is a goal that a lot of people have, whether they are quilters or they have a different craft that they're focused on.
That's
but,
right.
Just having those opportunities to travel and it's, it's really, I don't know, it's just a neat thing to have as part of your life. And I know it's a goal many people have. So do you feel like the thing that sort of made it happen for you was being able to develop this very unique process and unique theory that or application of a theory that, as you were saying earlier, nobody else was doing. In other words, it's, teaching just sort of regular dyeing, a lot of people could do all over the place. But this was sort of only something you could get from Carol. And is that, I mean, if you were talking to somebody who was hoping to break into this, would you say to them, develop a body of work that's only yours?
I would absolutely say that. I would say learn, and do practice teaching wherever you can. Find local groups that want you to speak to them and want you to show them how to do things, and start teaching them what you know. But when you get a glimmer of an idea of a different way to do something, or something that might be a little bit unique in its approach and different from what other people are doing, follow that little idea and see where it takes you. Because when you want to go onto the national scene, it's really great to have your own take on things. You don't really want to be doing a rehash of what somebody else has done. You want to have a new vision. You're going to be using some tried and true techniques, yes, but you also want to have your own vision that will set you apart, that will be a real reason for someone to sign up for your class and to invite you to come maybe all the way across the country, or to come farther than you would have gone before. And to invite you maybe over someone else who's also teaching some similar techniques, maybe overlaps with yours, but the way you do it and the type of things that you do show your own personality or your own unique take on things. And that makes your class interesting and unique. And it will help you if you want to expand the places that you teach, or the way that you teach, or even if you want to teach online, the things that you offer will be different than someone else's. And there'll be a place for you. There'll be certain people that resonate with what you're doing. Wow, that's interesting to me, and they'll seek you out.
Right.
I really, really do think that that's a great way if you want to expand on your teaching, to kind of build on the foundation of what you know, but take a little farther.
And really focusing on that content and making that content truly unique and just truly rich, and worth, as you said, buying a plane ticket for. So, just to think about that. And I also really appreciate your honesty and how much time it took you to develop these things. It was a year for you to make the materials to go to Nancy's class, and then another year for you to make the materials to teach your own class. And that's a long period of time. This didn't happen instantly and overnight where you were jettisoned into this, teaching career. This was a long time in the making. And I'm sure and there were years leading up to even going to Nancy's class, 10 years. And then I'm sure it's also shifted and changed and refined since then. So it's a long process. And in order to make a body of work that's really worth this kind of, acclaim. So,
and because I do teach 5-day classes quite a bit, I have quite a list of them. Every time I develop a new one, I go through a whole new cycle of development. And many times it might be another year or another 6 months of development for a new class. And, what makes that all possible is really the fact that I just love dyeing so much. I just love this process of creating color, and it is like people talk about their passion. There is passion to it, because if it didn't interest me to that level, I wouldn't feel driven to create. I've discovered some new things. Oh my gosh, I'd like to share this in another way with my students, and that's what leads to another class. It's something that I've found out subsequently, not just, let's see, my old class is getting boring, now I need a new class. That's not the driver. The driver has to be, I found out something else that's really cool. What else can I do with this?
You remain curious and are continuing to develop your skills and to follow your own curiosity. And that's what keeps it alive. And I think that's also really important.
It's a lot of work to do this, you know, and if I didn't have that interest, it would be a lot easier to go, get a job somewhere and I would just do some work that someone else laid out in front of me. But for following my own, independent business, I need to have an intrinsic interest in it, or it just wouldn't be worth, even getting paid wouldn't be enough to pay me for doing the work, because there's, as you said, there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's, I want to back up a minute and in a minute and talk about your upbringing. But before we do that, can you describe for people sort of today what your schedule looks like sort of in a given year? I know you set aside some time to continue to quilt yourself for your own personal projects in the winter, but throughout the year, like how much time are you really on the road, and how much time are you home? What is your schedule like?
Well, that has changed a little over the years. Since I started teaching nationally in 2002, so that's about 15 years ago, it built up and it built up and it built up. And for a while, I was teaching 10 weeks a year. And that was away from home. And so that was a lot of travel, because that, 10 5-day classes, there are travel days before, after, and there are a lot of preparation days before and after. So it was absolutely a full-time job at that point of 100% working for teaching all the time when I had that level of teaching of 10 weeks a year. So I sustained that for quite a number of years, but it began to kind of wear on me a little bit, that I didn't have enough time on my own for development of new ideas and for, piecing, sewing, and making some things, which I still love to do. So I started backing off a little bit on booking that much. And so I started, just booking maybe more like 8 weeks a year. And I did that for a number of years, and I had a little more time for my own work in my life. But now I'm stepping back even a little farther. My husband is recently retired, and as often happens with retirees, one of the first things you want to do is you want to travel different places. So that's one of the interesting things we're doing now, and we have the opportunity to, take some longer trips, and we both love to do photography and are studying that and really enjoying that together, which is pretty awesome. So I want some time in my life for travel. And now I have grandchildren too, so I want some time in my life to spend with them. So that time had to come from somewhere. So I had to pull back a little bit from booking as much teaching as I was booking for a while. And now I'm booking about 6 weeks a year of teaching. And so
do you have people at home, like an assistant or something, who's sort of keeping things going, or are you the only employee?
I'm just me. It's just me at this point. I've been on the verge of getting some help. There have been times where it would have been really nice, but still I'm just at the point of just doing it all myself. And, I don't know, it's like, it's a big step to step into the point of having employees or, even a virtual assistant or something to help you with email or whatever. I still do all of it myself. And sometimes I'm thinking, well, it would really definitely give me more time if I would figure out how I could outsource some of that work. And so maybe I will at that point. I have given it some thought.
Yeah. You and I are in the same place. So very different work lives, but same thinking when it comes to help hiring help. So
exactly.
It's a big hurdle.
It's a thinking process, and it's a kind of a big step. You really have to identify your goals of what you would want out of having somebody work for you, what area you'd want them to work in, and exactly what you'd want them to do, and how could it help.
Right, exactly. And that's the process I'm in right now, but I haven't come to a final conclusion.
Yeah. I've been following you, so when you do, let us all
we'll support each other if we if we decide to. So, all right. So let's back up a little bit. Where did you grow up? Did you grow up in the New York area?
No, I grew up in California. I grew up in the Bay Area in Oakland, and that's where I grew up and I went to college in Santa Barbara for a couple of years at University of California, and then I graduated from University of Washington in Seattle.
Okay.
And then I went to graduate school a little bit in Berkeley.
Oh, okay. And were you, I mean, I know you went on to become an English teacher. Were you an English major?
I was an English major and French. And so I did teach English for a while, and then I switched over to French. And so actually I had more years of teaching French than I did of teaching English.
Okay. And were you always artistic? I mean, were you artistic as a kid?
Yeah, actually, yeah, I just always loved art, and I was thinking about being an art major, but I was one of those kind of nerdy kids that I loved all kinds of things. I loved singing, and I loved art, and I loved languages, and I loved history. I loved all kinds of things. And so, it was the typical, my parents said to me, yes, but what will you do with art? And I had no clue. And so I thought, okay, I'll take a regular major. And my father was a teacher, teaching was sort of in my family. And so it seemed sort of logical for me to go into teaching. And so I did. And I really did enjoy it. Although teaching, I first taught in middle school, and I really respect all those who teach in middle school. It's takes a lot. And so I did middle school several years, and then I switched over to high school, which was a little bit better fit for me. I love teaching high school students. They're, I have an affinity for them, but it was also really fun switching over to adults because it was just wonderful to leave. Oh, there's a lot of complications in teaching in public schools that, it wears on you. It can be a burnout job sometimes.
It really can. That is a true statement. I definitely felt that when I was a public school teacher myself. And I'm wondering what caused you to finally leave. So you had this 20-year career. Was it that you were making quilts and could see potential in a new career in that direction, or was there some other reason?
Well, in teaching high school, when I had children, I was out of teaching for a few years while I had my children, and then they were like preschoolers, and I actually met the French teacher at the high school in the strawberry patch. We were picking strawberries to make jam, and she was picking strawberries for her jam in the summertime, and she said, oh, we're going to need a French teacher. Won't you come back? And I said, oh my gosh, my children are still so small, but my oldest son was going to enter kindergarten. And so I knew he's going to be tied up for half the day. And my youngest son was old enough to start preschool. I said, but, she said, well, you know what? It would only be 2 hours a day. And I said, oh, so that would fit in with them being involved in like a preschool program and a kindergarten program. So I did go back, and I went back part-time. So that was perfect for me because I could have some time away from being mommy, which is always nice, have a professional identity again. And then I could also come home and have an hour or two to do some quilting before the children got home from school. So it was like best of both worlds to me. And so I did that for a number of years. I taught part-time at the high school, whatever number of French hours were over and above her day. She was the full-time French teacher, and I was the part-time French teacher. And so that worked out really well for me. And so I was continuing to do quilting that entire time and saw the potential for just, wanting to do more and wanting to do more. So I actually started teaching local quilt classes. At the same time, I was teaching French in the morning. I was teaching quilting classes in the evening. And that was a hectic lifestyle with young children, and, went through a phase of that. And then eventually, one year there wasn't enough French classes to fill a part-time job over and above the full-time teacher's day. And so I didn't have any classes that year except for my quilt classes. And then I just loved that so much. And I just felt, it's time to make that shift. I'm going to going to put all my eggs in the quilting basket and leave the French basket behind.
But I'm sure that your training as a teacher and then your experience as a teacher, writing lesson plans and working with children, informs the way that you teach adults. Although teaching adults is different, but still, people are people and there's similarities. Exactly. So I wondered if you have a few tips or things that, are concrete, methods that you bring from that former career into this one.
I think, there is actually a lot that transfers over for sure. And one of the things that I know I do that I probably never would have done unless I'd been a high school teacher is the way I plan my classes. Because I don't just, kind of make a list of what I'm going to teach them and make a couple of handouts to give them. I think through every step of the day, like I did when I was in high school. I had my planning for high school students down to 15-minute blocks because that seemed to be the attention span of ninth graders. And so ninth graders were like, I knew what I was doing with them every 15 minutes, and sometimes it would take longer than 15 minutes to get something across. But if they were ready for something new, I was ready to shift to a different thing every 15 minutes to keep them interested. And so that sort of granular planning of exactly how the class was going to go and thought that through in my mind. I'm going to do this and then I'm going to do that. And in order to do that, they have had to know this. So it's all very sequential so that they'll have the right preparation for understanding the more complex concepts. That sequential sort of very granular planning is what I do for my 5-day classes. And so I know that for the entire 5 days. Mm-hmm. And if I hadn't, sort of had the training of high school and had to write those lesson plans, and there were some schools I worked in where I had to turn those lesson plans in a certain format and so forth. That level of planning is one of the things that, because dyeing classes are very active. I plan like I did for my teenagers. There's certain work that we'll do sitting down, and then we need some active work. We need to get up and we need to move around and we need to, do things. And then we need to have some time for discussion. And then, so I plan activities that way. I plan sequences of thought. And so that really has changed and informed my teaching, just having the experience of teaching kids and any kind of teaching, no matter the age. You need to know where you're headed and what the concept is this moment and what the next concept will be and how you're going to teach that.
And you really focus on the why, like why do things work the way that they do? I know you said like looking in a book, for example, about dyeing, there's some accurate information and there's some inaccurate information. And if you're just learning, it's so hard to know, well, which of this information is accurate and which isn't accurate. But if you know the why, then you can understand and make that determination for yourself and begin to experiment and innovate on your own because you have the theory down. So I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about the importance of sort of teaching the why.
You're really good at finding out exactly what I'm about because that is so important to me. I don't know where you found this information, Abby, but you really hit it because it's just using dyeing as an example. Very often it's presented as a list of things to do. Do this, do that, do the other thing, and you'll get colored fabric. And yeah, it works. And, you get colored fabric. It's really easy to dye things and get colored fabric. But if you want to get more specific and have certain types of results, you want a certain visual texture, or you want a certain color, or you want to get more specific in your results, then knowing why and why you're doing this step at this time is so helpful because that's what's going to, making the changes, do this step before that step, and that's going to have a change in the result. What change is it going to have and which way do I want to do it? So I like to present information in that here are just the basic things you need to know in order to dye. And then here are your options. And if you use this option, this type of result happens. And if you use that option, this type of result happens. And so it's because, I think one of the reasons I have this approach to dying is when I started, I taught myself. And I taught myself by reading books that other people had written. And I'd read one book and she would say, never use salt. You don't need salt. And then I'd read another book and it would say, oh, you always must use salt. You can't leave salt out. And I well, what is the problem here? Why are they saying diametrically opposite things? And that is very hard to learn dying by reading 3 or 4 books. It's really a lot easier to learn dying by reading one book. Mm-hmm. But I kind of decided then that I needed to know why for myself and to understand the difference of using salt and not using salt. And so when I present that to students, I like to let them know the difference rather than just saying, here's how to do it this way, that's all there is. I like to present it in a way of, this is why salt can be helpful, and teach them the why of it. And then if you leave it out, this is what could happen. Mm-hmm. And, see the options and see the why of it. And I think that's really, really education, is taking people beyond an understanding of just following a set of instructions to really being a dyer, to sort of identifying as, this is something I am because I actually understand this. I'm not just doing it. I really kind of understand some of the basics here, and I know what's going on in the dye pot.
Yeah, and that's the huge value of taking a class, is getting that much deeper understanding and being able in the moment to ask your questions, when you're thinking about something and trying to puzzle it out, and then something occurs to you and you say, well, what if? And then the person's there for you to ask. And that's such a wonderful thing about taking a class. And I know you still take classes yourself.
When I can, I really enjoy it. And it's always good for a teacher, I think, to put herself back in the place of the learner, because when you've been teaching a long time, it's so interesting to sit in a classroom and you're looking at the teacher, you're learning from the teacher, but you're also observing the way this teacher is teaching the class. So it's like you're two people. You're looking at it as a learner, but you're also kind of have this meta teacher sitting above thinking about, well, what's her process? Oh, yeah, I see what she's doing here. She's leading us in this way. Oh, this is interesting. And you might pick up some ideas that you'd want to learn, that you'd want to use in a class sometime, or perhaps trying this method might engage your students also.
And it's also really helpful to get back in that sense of not knowing how to do something, or feeling like you're bad at you're bad at it. And you're frustrated because the thing isn't working and everybody else's looks so nice. And anyway, because as a learner,
all those emotions of being a learner,
it's an emotional experience. And as an adult learner, it can be maybe more uncomfortable than it is.
Oh,
as a
we're
kid.
hard on ourselves.
Yeah.
We're very hard on ourselves. Mm-hmm. Kids can be hard on themselves too.
Yeah.
And but adults can be so hard because they just, they want it all. I'm a capable adult. I want to know it, and I want to know it this very moment. They want to be instantly successful at everything. And they don't give themselves time to do it wrong. It's a good experience to make a mistake and then realize what happened. Oh, okay. And you understand something in a different way if you've had a chance to make a mistake. The only problem with making a mistake is if you don't have a little bit of help in understanding what went wrong, because you might misdiagnose what went wrong, and then you're down the wrong path for a while. Right. But if you're making mistakes actually, and you have some kind of help figuring out, oh, why did that happen? Or you can test a few things and figure that out for yourself, perhaps. But then you really have a richer learning experience.
Absolutely.
So that's why I love hands-on classes, because we learn absolutely as much from anyone who tries something and does it quote unquote wrong, because there's just, with dyeing, there's really nothing that's wrong. There's just a different result, and some results might be more pleasing to you than others, but it's really not wrong or right. But there's some things that are kind of, we call them right because they just lead to successful results more often, or results that more people tend to prefer. But very often, trying something wrong might just lead to a new technique that might be really cool.
Right, exactly. There's always something to learn, and the time is never wasted, which is something I have to repeat to myself. Being a mom of young kids who doesn't have a lot of time on your hands, when you work on something and then it fails and you're like, I wasted my whole free time today working on this and now it's in the trash. But you have to just say that's not wasted time. That was learning, that was time that I spent learning that way didn't work. So that's really important. And I know that you wrote a book with a co-author, Melanie Testa, and that came out fairly recently. And how did you meet Melanie?
Melanie was a student of mine at Pro Chemical and Dye. She took a class from me. I don't remember the exact year, but it was fairly early on. It might have been, I don't know, around 2004, 2005, something in those earlier days. And she really took to what I was teaching very quickly. And she started using the dyeing techniques that I was teaching in that class. And then in her development, she was wanting to thicken the dye, and she is a wonderful artist, and beautiful imagery that she does. And she wanted to do that not only with paints and those type of materials, but she also wanted to do it with dye on cloth. So she was thickening the dye up and using them as paints, and she was doing quite well. But as you know, Melanie had 2 other books before the one that we wrote together, and beautiful books that she did. But at one point, she was getting frustrated by the results she was getting, and she was trying different things, but she couldn't seem to get the results she was after. And so she did come back and take another class from me about using thickened dyes. And we kind of went through her process and solved the stumbling blocks that she was having that were, giving her lighter, paler, more washed out looking colors than she desired. And, so we started working on that together. And I did an independent study with her, via email that to really kind of refine her process. And she loved what I was teaching with, techniques of thickened dye. And so at one point she just said, why don't we write a book? Let's write a book together. I'm using these really awesome techniques of stamping and stenciling, and it's not just stamping and stenciling, but it's the way the layers go together that was kind of unique about Melanie's approach. And I had the color approach of the way I mix up the thickened dyes, and she had techniques, and I had used those techniques, but more individually, whereas she was really into the layering of the techniques. And so we decided to work together and write the book, and it was a very rich experience for both of us. While we were writing that book, it was so fun. We were both coming up with new ideas and bouncing them back and forth with each other and refining, and trying new things. It was a very rich time writing the book.
And working together with another artist is a neat way to write a book. And so we should just repeat the name of this book so people can check it out if they want to. It's called Playful Fabric Printing. So you can go check that book out. And it ended up being published by Pokey Bolton, who has been a guest on this show in the past. But originally you had worked with another publisher, and then things kind of shifted gears right toward the end.
Yeah, the publisher went through a big upheaval, and they'd been sold, and then there was a big upheaval, and eventually that reflected on the authors that they had under contract, and they had a lot of new editors coming in and just different ideas, and so they dropped a number of their contracts, and we were one of them. It was really surprising to us because we were pretty close to our final deadline, and so it was kind of a shock that happened, and we had put so much work and under fairly tight deadlines, and we were so excited about our material. It was so close to being at the printer. I mean, it was that close that we were just like, whoa. And we just kind of retreated after that a little bit. We pulled back, and we needed to, kind of rest because we'd been hitting it so hard for a while, and we just kind of needed to get our minds around what had happened and figure out, was there a way to move forward? And so we took a bit of a break from it all, and we eventually came back together and said, we do have some wonderful material here that we worked hard for and we put a lot of ourselves into. So let's see if we can get it out into the world in some way. So we were starting to look at other publishers and to select which ones we thought we might want to send a proposal to, when Pokey Bolton called us up and said that she kind of had heard through the publisher's grapevine what had happened to our title, and were we interested in sending her a proposal? And of course, Pokey was a founder of Quilting Arts Magazine and Interweave Press, and obviously has huge credibility in the publishing industry, but she had gone independent and started her own business called Crafting a Life. And so she was planning to do some publishing, but also to lead the retreats that she's leading in Napa, California, and there's one coming up in January that is awesome, but that's a little aside. But still, we were just like, this is so exciting because we have so much respect for Pokey and her abilities and her vision as a publisher. So we sent her a proposal and talked about the book as we had it, and she offered us the opportunity to be the first book that she published under the Crafting a Life imprint or banner. So that is pretty thrilling for us.
Yeah,
what
a wonderful, happy ending to what was a really stressful moment. So I'm so glad. Yeah, I'm so glad that she was there waiting for you, and you had this, and were there for her, and it was a good combination. So that's a great ending, and I think that it does also say, like, don't give up if you take some time to rest, but also if you do have something there and you believe in it, that just because it didn't work out for one publisher is not a message that it's no good. It's just the message that it wasn't good for them at that moment. And it very well may be good for somebody else.
Right.
And that's what happened here.
I think part of what worked was that Pokey is a surface designer herself. She likes to dye. She likes to print fabric. She kind of understands the value of dye. Paint is, a lot of our techniques work very well with paint. They'll be, if you like to use paint, you can still buy our book and use paint with it. But Pokey also understood that dye is unique and that people need some education about dye, and there haven't been that many recent books written about dye. There's some excellent books about dye out there, but not that much recently. And so Pokey saw the value and the vision for our book, and that's what you need to look for. Is you need to look for somebody who can share your vision of your book.
Absolutely. And, that's super important. So I want to make sure we get to real quick to some of your recommendations, because you've got some good ones. And I want to make sure we get to them. So the first one you wanted to recommend is your Instant Pot, which everybody seems to love.
Yeah. It's probably everybody has heard about them by now, but maybe there are a few people who haven't. An Instant Pot is simply a pressure cooker that is electronic instead of a pressure cooker that's on the stove. And the electronic advantage that it gives you is the scary part of, the old pressure cookers on the stove exploding and putting rice all over your ceiling or something. That's pretty much eliminated by the electronic controls, because it can shut itself off if it builds up too much pressure or something. So it's just, it made me brave enough to try pressure cooking when I had never tried it before. And a lot of people seem to have jumped on the bandwagon because it's pretty fun to use. My favorite thing is making my own yogurt, and I make my own Greek yogurt now. I make it about every other week, and my husband and I, with a full gallon of milk, and my husband and I eat it up.
And then you also wanted to recommend a particular thermometer for checking the dye bath temperatures that you really like.
Right. There is a laser thermometer now, and it's just a gadget. It's not terribly expensive. It looks like a little gun, a little yellow plastic gun, and you just pull this trigger, and it shoots a little laser beam into whatever you want to measure the temperature. So if I measure the temperature of the floor, I just aim the little laser beam at the floor, and it tells me what the temperature of the floor is, or the wall. Or if I want to take the temperature of a dye bath, I just shoot it at the water and tells me what the temperature of the water is instantly.
Well, that's super high tech. That's cool. Yeah. So I will link to that. That's really neat. And then you also wanted to recommend an app for the iPad called Procreate that you've been using for like sketching out embroidery projects.
Yes. So I have, I love to do embroidery as a relaxation thing when I have some downtime, and so I use hand-dyed cloth. I use hand-dyed threads, and like to put them together in some embroidery, and just love to do it free form without a lot of planning. I don't really like to draw my embroidery designs out on my cloth or anything. But sometimes I want to get an idea of where I'm going with the embroidery. So I will use this Procreate app, which some digital artists are doing absolutely amazing things with it, but I use it at a very rudimentary level myself. But it's still super fun and easy to use, even if you don't know much about digital art. But so with this app, I can use my iPad, I can hold it over my little piece of cloth that I'm going to embroider on, and I can take a picture of that piece of cloth. And then that can be a layer in the Procreate app. And then I put another layer, a blank layer on top of that, and I can just draw with my finger or with a stylus or with an Apple Pencil, if you have one of those for your iPad. And I can just draw like, oh, I think I want to put a flower here, or I want to put some abstract lines over here, or I want to make a leaf over here, and I just sketch. And if I want to keep that layer, but maybe I want to try something else, I can keep that, but I can hide that layer, and then I can try something else, and then I can flip back and forth between them and see which I like better, or I can erase part of a line, or I can erase all of a line. I can do the lines in color, the color thread I think I might be using, or I can do them just with white or with black. So it's very versatile, and it's very, very simple. So that's like, it provides my whole quote unquote pattern for a little piece of embroidery that isn't actually drawn on. I'm still going to make my embroidery shapes all freehand or freeform, but it kind of gives me just enough guidance. And so it's pretty fun to do.
And we can see them on your Instagram account, and you've got these great photos that are like a progression of, the stitching. So we see it sort of not really filled in. And then as you progressively fill it in, and it's really gorgeous. So everyone should go check this out because it's pretty stunning. You're going to say, oh my gosh, I've never seen embroidery like this before. So you should definitely go check it out. I'll link to your Instagram in the show notes so people can take a look. And yeah, that's really cool.
I have two Instagram accounts. One's sort of my more general one, and then this one is just for my stitching. So
I see. So you've got one just there. Okay.
Just for stitching, and that's Stitch Sewed. And so, yeah, put the link in there. And what I was trying to do is like take a little snapshot of it each day. So I'd sort of put some stitching in and take a snapshot. And so sometimes I would only stitch for 5 or 10 minutes, or sometimes I'd stitch for 15 minutes or half an hour. So there's just a little bit of progress with each shot.
Right.
It's sort of fun to see.
So cool. Yeah. And they're beautiful all together, really. So, yeah. So Carol, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the While She Naps podcast. It was super talking with you.
Oh, it was really great to talk with you. I've enjoyed listening to your podcast for a long time, and I'm scared to listen to my my voice on it, but I guess I'll just listen into and see what it sounds like when we play it back.
Absolutely. It'll be great. Don't worry. So you've been listening to the While She Naps podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Visit my blog, whileshenaps.com, where you can sign up for my email newsletter to get the best in sewing, blogging, and small business delivered right to your inbox each week. And thank you to today's episode sponsor, Stitchcraft. Online or at the pretty pink building in Boca Raton, Stitchcraft is a one-stop shop for the best service and selection for creative quilting, sewing, and stitching. New in 2018 is their YouTube channel for up-to-date tips and techniques for your favorite fiber arts. They offer batiks, tropicals, cave facet, and thousands of other fabrics, plus embroidery, wool, and punch needle. Make a resolution this year to hone your skills or learn a new craft, and let Stitchcraft help. Use that promo code NAPS2018 to save 15% on your next order. Thank you so much, Stitchcraft. And if you enjoy the show, tell a friend about it. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.